Good afternoon, Generation W, and welcome back to Refresh. As you know, this is a time to connect, be inspired, right? To learn something new, and ultimately feel a bit better about ourselves and this time we get to spend together. I can't tell you how valuable that is. How is everybody? Right? I always looked at people just tell me how you are, how you are in the chat. What a time to refresh. And for me, never enough refreshment from where I sit. And I would imagine for my colleague here, I say colleague as if I was a doctor,
We're
but
together.
from a doctor perspective, I would probably think he would agree with that.
I
For us
totally
here
agree.
at Gen W, that's where we are today, headquarters. It's been 4 weeks since we hosted our annual thought leadership event, Generation W Believe, both virtually and in person at the home of our great partner, the University of North Florida's Lazarus Theater. I would say, and I am sure we'll hear from Dr. Kim, the energy was electric as we chose to explore the theme of believe. And I think we all will do some more exploring on believe. I don't think we can do it enough as a future refresh. And I think it might come up today as well. But today, I have to tell you, I'm still recovering. I'm a recovering Generation W attendee. I continue to think about the experience. I continue to evaluate and analyze and feel that very special time that many of us got to spend together, and not everybody. And if you'd like to spend it, just send us a note, info@genw.com, and we'll send you a link. But for me, on an ongoing basis, two words continue to come up to the fore: connection and community. Connection and community. So much research talks about how connection and community, which both happens to be C words, by the way, elevates and validates this concept in helping us live lives of happiness and meaning, which is we all seek. As always, when we put our explorers hats on at Generation W, we look for a spectrum of thoughts, ideas, and issues that surround the theme. And that is how we came up with yet another C word, and that's cancer. By the statistics and the real lives that we are living, cancer touches over what? Dr. Kim, 1 in 2 people will currently know somebody who's been diagnosed with this illness. It's very present in our lives. And I am personally living the cancer journey of several friends and family members. And I'm also fortunate to sit on a national board, the V Foundation for Cancer Research, which is why I know I personally feel so strongly about bringing community and connection together so that we have a trusted and capable resource that is available, like Dr. Kim, to us as we seek knowledge and support. And seeking knowledge and support, especially in this space, feels like it requires courage, another C word. So thank you to Dr. Barbel Johnson. We're going to call her Dr. Kim. Of course, accessibility definitely infuses us with more confidence. Who during the day, along with Dr. Masalem and Alexis Jackson, they shared their work, their research, their insights and recommendations to oversubscribed, I may add, workshop audience at Generation W. We had people at the office having to contend with, I can't get in, I can't get in, I can't get in. I attended the energy to one of them, and I have to tell you, it was palpable, and all of you were amazing, Dr. Kim. The feedback that I heard was all about gratitude. And so I want to thank you for returning our first refresh back since our event so that we can continue this very, very valuable conversation. Brief little synopsis of the amazing career and human that Dr. Barbel Johnson is. She's a community-centric, patient-focused family physician and principal research investigator. And I really want to talk about that too. I love research, and I know science doesn't seem to be as cool, but science is cool, right?
Yes.
Over the past 3 decades, she's impacted the healthcare field as a compassionate provider of direct primary long-term and urgent care. She's a well-versed leader with a commendable track record in health equity advocacy. She's equipped with the ability to lead with integrity, inspire, and collaborate with a multidisciplinary team. She's regarded by colleagues and all of us who had the pleasure just to get to know her for her clinical trial expertise and her passion for the community. So you were so generous. Thanks for keeping the conversation going. I want to welcome all of our guests who are continuing to come in on our Zoom and hello in Facebook land. I just want to reiterate, one of the gifts we feel we can share as a Generation W community is to provide access to amazing amazing, thoughtful, brilliant, generous, smart people directly to you. And so today, be courageous, confident, curious. These are the words we use with our WOW girls. By all means, post your thoughts, post your questions. Okay, ready to go?
Wow.
Okay, here we go. My first question to you is, what did you take away from the workshop sessions that you delivered? As I said, it was energetic, it was very intimate. People revealed a lot about what they wanted to know, who they were, their concerns. I know what we learned. What did you learn?
Well, Donna, I got to take my glasses off for this. I learned so much. And first of all, thank you. Thank you for trusting us to be the trusted voice among others in this community for hard topics and for not so hard topics. Thank you for letting the Mayo, the Comprehensive Cancer Center, be part of be part of the Cs that's in this space. And as I've mentioned to you, thank you just for holding space for women like me, independent of the degree that I have or what I do as a mom. Just thank you for creating a collaborative space at least once a year, and then these virtual spaces just for women. So I think that it's the gift that keeps on giving. And with that, I feel that it was just part of the meal, when I was there delivering, that I got takeaways, because these virtual opportunities are like little, bite-sized meals throughout the year. And you know how I've been, a groupie. So, but the Gen W audience, like last year, like this year, is a hungry and just very smart audience. So for Dawn Musalem, for our patient advocate, for myself, we took away that we're doing God's work. We took away that we were in the right place at the right time. We also took away that we're serving a community, that C word. We're serving a community that still needs to know, like, even independent of what we do, there's still that need to understand how to navigate this space of cancer care, how to be in this continuum. And it's not surprising that it's oversold, because it's an overwhelming space to be in. The cancer world is transformative. The information is at best changing every 5 years, if not sooner. And so it's while I'm not a hematologist, I'm not an oncologist, I'm a family physician in this space, but it's the excitement. It's the excitement of having just the opportunity to bring the changes to this community and to empower sisters and women in this space.
But
And, it's
tell if you would,
mhm, mhm.
tell me about being a family. You said I'm not a
Yes,
hematologist, not an
yes, yes.
oncologist. I don't know if for somehow, tell me what it means to be a
Yeah,
family
it's
physician in the space.
my goodness. So in 1995, I came to this wonderful city of ours to train, and I wanted to do women's care. I wanted to take care of families. Had the opportunity to rotate with some community providers, and realized that the way that I affected women best was to take care of their families. So applied and was accepted to Mayo Clinic's family medicine residency training. So I'm a Mayo alumni, and training as a family physician, which is womb to tomb care on a campus that believes in practice research, that is so comprehensive in how it approaches medicine, was the biggest blessing of the academic gods, for me. And then it allowed me to really get grounded in the science and in love with collaboration, because everybody was only five numbers away, like the best and the brightest minds, to help me to take care of my patients. So I could be like a jack of all trades and master of none, and it was still okay, because my patients didn't suffer, because we are so collaborative here at Mayo Clinic. But I wanted to actually take the gifts that I got at Mayo and take it into the community. So I left Mayo early on in my career and wanted to teach. So I went to the University of Florida, where I was teaching residents and medical students, and that's where I actually fell in love with clinical research, because as we had more interaction with the biopharma industry, because of how I was hardwired as a Mayo doc, I wanted to know everything. I wanted to know who's in the trial, how did you get the data for your
Of
medication, how do I
course.
know it's going to work for me. And I wanted to be that, just that stopgap before I wrote a prescription for patients who were trusting me. And so I realized I was really loving and digging the space. And so when I had the opportunity to get credentialed to do clinical research, and this is like 13, 14 years ago with the biopharma industry, it was just a continuation. It was a continuation of what I wanted to do. And I found it was my niche, it was a different way to serve and to be a family physician. So when Mayo last couple years ago came to me and said, "You're doing clinical trials in the community, you're advancing your trials, you have diversity in your trials. We want the same things. You're one of us. Let's talk." And we started to talk in a collaborative sense. And before you knew it, just because this was the right time with our leadership, with our funding, with the world as it is, for
Right.
me to come back home. So I came back under the Cancer Center because that's where the greatest need was from my experience as a researcher, so that I could serve in this capacity as a director for community clinical trials administration, so that I can take our value rich, well thought out platform of clinical trials that are in the cancer space, and that's from both prevention and early intervention to novel therapeutics, and it's the spectrum of our portfolio, and to
Right.
share that with my colleagues in the community. So as a family physician, it's really because of the spectrum of my understanding of patient care, taking care of 20 patients a day, from womb to tomb. It was because of the 100 trials that I've had in the clinical trial space. It was because I was an alumni, but it was really because we were well matched. It was the time, I told you I don't believe in coincidences, but there's never been a greater time to really try to take this elephant on, with the advances, with our leadership, with Mayo's commitment against racism, because we do know that lots of our medical struggles are in the social determinant space. And so, I wanted to be part of the team. So I came back where I had the
You're more than part of the team. You helped lead the team. There's no doubt about
well,
that. But
and it's definitely a we. So that's what a family physician, like, ends up in a cancer center, back at home, as I call it, in the community that helped her raise two children. So
that's really cool. That is really interesting. I want to break down. I just want to say again, welcome to all of our guests. All of them are special, but I just definitely want to say today we have I don't know, I guess it'd be the CEO of the Florida Commission on Women, Lori Day, is joining us.
Lori.
There's a lot of work on behalf of women across the state, and we're grateful to her as well. Everyone does their part. We all come together as a team, right?
Got it.
You talk a lot about clinical trials, and part of the reason we put this panel together is because we wanted to break down the language. Like sometimes you walk in, a doctor starts telling you stuff. They always tell you to bring somebody because your brain goes dead. We talk about clinical trials. Tell us exactly what that means and why they're so valuable.
Yeah, and that's a word that you just gave. So in the clinical trial space, and we call different things clinical research, clinical trial. I'm going to kind of approach it the same way in the space. And while the sponsors of this work could be different, and the collaboration between industry and academics could be different, for us, what it means is that we get an opportunity to take on a challenge of either finding out something new, or finding a different way to do something, or finding a way to identify something earlier. We get the opportunity to think about these things and then create a protocol, so that we can figure out what's the best way to do this that is safe, efficacious, ethical, and then to have our community of patients enter into those spaces with the trust that's extremely needed after the history of things that we know about, and participate in this trial to, to contribute to medicine and to better science, but also, if we're doing our job right, to really benefit from that hands-on care. So if a clinical trial is a space that we do advance science, every medication that you've ever been prescribed, most things that we know, like Tylenol and the over-the-counter things, have come through a space. But even things like, what we put albuterol in, if we're an asthmatic, those things that the FDA has taken on, that information has come to our authorities through the space of clinical trials. And why that's important is, like I mentioned, the advances that we're seeing. The world is changing in so many different ways, but in cancer care, it is changing quite rapidly.
Why
And
is
we
that? And
and,
why
and,
and how? Tell us what that
yeah,
means, because that sounds
it's
hopeful.
because it's because it's synergistic. So we're actually finally at a point where more people are surviving cancer, and we have to now how do we deal with the survivors? What kind of anticipatory guidance do we give them? How do we allow people to live their best lives and not worry about something coming back? And do we have the evidence to support that, you know? So how do we have this evidence-based space? And what's driving that is all of the technology and the big data that we now have and the advances of looking at things differently. We are in a world where I've never seen a 3D cell model until we had a speaker from Johns Hopkins here this week to see what that would look like. It was in the clinical trial space, but can you imagine being able to see a cellular model of your cancer cell and or to see that before anyone else can see it so that you know what to do about it so it doesn't become a cancer, so that it doesn't become something that can impact you. These are the nitty gritty parts. And I know I'm kind of nerdy, but I'm not a basic scientist, but it really is a space that we are helping together to advance this body of science. My caveat is that those who are in the clinical trial space, both as investigators and as participants in trials, are who are helping us to deal with the advancement. But there are so many people that are not in that space, particularly underrepresented minorities, particularly the rural community. And the C that I probably hate the most, COVID. COVID
Yeah.
helped us to unlayer and uncap just a lot of the things in medicine that that we really had to deal with. It made us more collaborative because the world was coming together to fight something, but it also helped us to realize that the same things that impact care in general are the same issues that we have in understanding and trusting the clinical trial space.
Yeah.
And
Well, you know,
and so
I really do
yeah.
want to, I think people have questions about
Mm-hmm,
cancer because it's such a frightening
yeah.
word. I continue to go back to
Mhm,
like, what do you say to when somebody gets a
yes.
diagnosis? How do you help care for them?
Hmm.
But before we pivot over there, I just wanted to talk about trust,
Hmm.
and clinical, and because we're talking about, medical equity and
Hmm.
clinical trials, women should know that up until 10 years, maybe ago, white women weren't part of clinical trials, right? We have been
Yeah.
over medicated as women for the last 100 years because
Yeah.
all clinical trials, meaning testing of drugs,
Mhm,
that's a
mhm,
clinical trial, was done on men. Men
mhm.
are heavier, they're bigger, right? So all the dosage came out on men,
Yeah.
not here
Mhm,
to us. And so if we do not participate, whether we are women of color, Asian heritage, whatever, Ashkenazi heritage,
mhm,
whatever we are, we have to want to contribute. We have to invest in our own health by letting the health workers, right, utilize our data to come up with better solutions for ourselves.
Absolutely. And women was probably the first vulnerable group that we identified in this space because we weren't including women. And even if we said we were including women in the clinical trial space, our protocols, that word I mentioned earlier, had language in it that said you must have 4 types of birth control to be in this trial. You must not be planning to get pregnant. You must not have green hair, you know. So the language of the protocols made them it seemed, come on as you are, but the language were restricting our ability to include women and other groups. And so we are very conscious about that now. And now we're being regulated by the FDA. There's a new law that was just passed in 23 that says before you bring your data, show me your intentionality of bringing women. Show me why, you don't have certain groups that show me why you thought that having those groups that you do was important and why you thought the absence of groups was not important. So the FDA is holding the community of science accountable for inclusiveness in clinical research, but it is a trust factor. So even though we're invited to the party, are we going to go? And it depends, right, Donna? It's going to depend on how we feel, how hopeful we are, how much we believe that this is the right thing to do, how much risk we want to take, who we're talking to, and so that's where the empowerment of the Gen W women. I think being empowered to know that you can get this information, which is why you came to our sessions, that we can direct you to trusted sources of information. Um,
Right.
so that you can, and it's not a C word, but empowerment is so important in this space, so that you can be empowered to help. And with that empowerment, hopefully you will challenge not the scientists, because you probably won't see us as the first line, but challenge your primary care providers, the family doctors that you see. And when you have something that is offered to you, you go, how do I know that this is the best thing for me at this time? How do I know that this change and this dose is necessary? How do I know? How do you know that it's nothing else? It's so empowering us to have a language in the primary care space, and that elevates the opportunity to say, is there a clinical trial that, that's could help me in a different way to manage this condition? And having those opportunities, I think, requires access, obviously, but it's one of the things that our community is so rich with. We have multiple ways to enter into healthcare system, in the safety net community, in the traditional medicine spaces, and because of that, we have multiple ways to enter into clinical trials. But we have work to do.
Right. Well, we always have work to do, don't we?
Yeah.
That makes
Yes.
life interesting every day. I want to
Yes.
again welcome everybody. I just want to reintroduce that we are here today with Dr. Barbel Johnson, who, along with her, who is a community-centric, patient-focused family physician and principal research investigator of trends and topics that touch us all, who are either directly impacted by cancer or know somebody who is. She's able to help us with all of that. We have a question from Cynthia. Cynthia, if you participate in a clinical trial, are you able to receive other treatment at the same time? Because if you get a placebo and you can't, that seems risky.
Yeah, and then in trials that are designed like that, where it's blinded or you're assigned one group or another. So first of all, your inclusion in that trial should be based on how safe and efficacious it is for you. So the fact that you're on placebo should not hurt you. It may not help you, but it should not hurt you if you're randomized to that trial correctly. So there are some risks, and those risks are identified upfront before you do anything. And it's in what we call the informed consent process. It's a process where you get to decide, am I willing to take this risk? Am I willing to accept that this may or may not work? Is there something down the road after 6 weeks in this protocol, do I get to switch and be on the active ingredient? Sometimes, the truth is that sometimes you're better in the safe arm because we're doing first in class therapy sometimes in other groups. So I think that the takeaway message is that clinical trials are risky, but it's a calculated risk, and
Got it.
they're safer than they've ever been. And so I think, Cynthia, that it's something that once you're in the space and you notice that you think you're on placebo or you're not responding as well, you're in charge in the clinical trial space. You can call uncle. You can say, you know what? I don't think this is for me, and then return to your standard of care. When there is a standard of care, that's great. But oftentimes in the space, there's often nothing else. And so it's a big spectrum, differently designed trials,
Right.
have different ways of dealing with this. But I think it is important that you understand that there are risks.
Right. So let's go back to the cancer space, that
Yeah.
unbelievable diagnosis.
Yes.
I had a friend, she was relatively young when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. Um, Created a huge amount of attention and worry among her friends and greater community. I remember her telling me that she has a room filled with pink. The people kept sending her pink things. And she was like, what am I going to do with these pink things? Like, someone should tell people what they should say. And I'm always sorry that I never asked her the next question, like, well, what should we say?
That is.
I'm always kind of plagued by that question. You want to be supportive, right? You want to say the right thing. You want to create an environment of trust and ease. And yet, many times we don't do that, even though we're well-intended. So
Right.
help us be better friends, parents, sisters, brothers, colleagues, or whatever it is, when we're dealing with a colleague who has cancer.
That's such a great question, and we struggle with it sometimes. But you had one of my favorite colleagues, Dr. Oladiru, on sometime before, and I'm going to actually just paraphrase what she said, because she said,
Yes.
you've got to read the room. She said, and it was the last year. I'm kind of a groupie here, so I watch a lot of these videos, but she said, read the room. If everyone seems a little hopeful, maybe you can just join in that energy, match the energy where you meet it. I think it's important that we are are aware, though, that, like she said, that some of the words that we use, like "you're going to fight this," "we're going to battle this," is maybe that's fine, but not at that moment. So it's also where and where you enter this conversation. So the most important, I think, is to understand kind of your relationship with the person, understand where they are, and then ask sometimes permission. Is it okay that I pray with you? Is it okay that that I bring something over? And if they don't want you to, let their no be a full sentence. I'll tell you, it wasn't my personal patient, but it was my mentor. My mentor was in Tampa, and his wife, and I don't think they'd mind me sharing the story, but Dr. William Cody, who was the mentor of mentors for me, and his wife is one of my dearest friends. So I know that she's sitting in a hospital, in Tampa on Thanksgiving. And I said, well, I'm going to take my flight directly from New York to Tampa so that I could sit with you on Thanksgiving. And she said, no, like, no, don't do that. I wanted to be supportive to the family unit. She wanted time with her husband. She wanted time to just be with her husband. And the first no was like, what do you mean? And the second
Right.
no, right, the second no helped me to understand what they needed at the time. And so I think reading the room, accepting what you get back, and being, having grace with relationships, but also being gracious to follow through on the things if they say that they need something, and if they say they don't need it right now, let that be enough.
Okay,
And
so
and and it's not one size fit all.
I know, I understand, we understand that, right? And I love what
Mhm,
Disha is
mhm,
asking us,
mhm,
right? You read the room,
mhm,
and the room is telling you that here's the mood, here's the tone, but what are
mhm,
the words? She says, I'm currently caregiving for my sister who's battling leukemia,
mhm,
and sometimes I don't know the right words to support her or make her feel
mhm,
better. And I know that you do because you're
mhm,
called upon to do that as well.
mhm,
You have a different kind of permission than we do as
mhm.
family members.
Yes. First of all, I'm sorry that your sister is battling this. And as your question indicates, it impacts everybody, right? So trust your relationship before that. Whatever relationship you had with the person. So it's a little more intimate when it's a family member like a sister. And if they're crying, you don't say, don't, stop crying. You allow the validated emotions that you're getting from whoever is there to be the emotion, even though you want not to be sad and you want to offer hope in that moment. Validate what's happening in that space with the person who's experiencing the disease. And there's always room for, sometimes there's room for humor, sometimes there's not room for humor, sometimes it's there's room for distraction, and thinking about better days, but it's so personal. And that's why we don't have a book yet. I'm sure Donna will write one because we've been talking about this, but we don't have, like, a cookbook of these are the things that you say and these are the things that you don't say. But we do have lived experiences, right? And I don't think that this space should be sacred differently than the earnestness and the honesty in which we experience each other's relationships. Sometimes we're going to get it wrong, and understand that I get it wrong a lot of times. And then, be reflective. Maybe the next day go say, hey, how are you? I'm so sorry yesterday if I caused you to feel this way or that way. But this is a longitudinal journey. So, like I said, some words may not be the right words, and it's not a one size fit all, but it is a challenge. And I think, Donna, the thing that actually I loved about you even bringing this to us as clinicians in the space when you asked us to do the talk is we had to think about it. We didn't have an answer, and we still don't, but we can give an approach. We can give a roadmap, a GPS of sorts of how to navigate this difficult space of cancer, cancer support.
Well, you did say something earlier about survivors, right?
Yeah,
What is the right way for us to support survivors? And
yeah.
I'm reminded that PTSD, right? Cancer survivors, there is a lot of emotional, psychological impact and work that needs to be unpacked as they heal, right? And get healthy.
A
So
lot.
what's the recommendation for that segment of the population to remain healthy and motivated to move forward?
Yeah. So Great question. And we're in an age where, we've got 18 million survivors of cancer. So we can't forget this population because they had cancer. In fact, the definition of a cancer survivor is a diagnosis of cancer. That's what the NIH says. You have cancer, you're a survivor of cancer until you're not. So it's an entire journey. It's an entire space. It's not after treatment. It's after diagnosis. You become a survivor. So approaching a survivorship in that space, it's understand that there is trauma and post-traumatic stress, and so you've got to be cognizant of where we are on this journey. Let's say you're finished with your 5 years of anti-estrogen therapy, and your sister had breast cancer. Now she's off of this medication, and where do you go in conversation? Do you act like cancer is way behind them and we can just have a normal life? No, it's part of their experience. So recognizing that, it's important that we recognize that there are survivors, recognize that they may be thinking about it but never say it because they may, and we're talking women in this space, but I'll tell you, one of the vulnerable places, men with prostate cancer, and as you know, African Americans men experience prostate cancer more aggressively and die more from prostate cancer. I was trying to unfold this information. I realized in talking to survivors and those who were early diagnosed that it was the stigma that came
Mhm.
with even talking about it. The
Right.
fact that the impotence conversation, that people would think that they weren't as anything, that would make them avoid having the conversation or showing any kind of emotion at all. Meanwhile, we have a population of men, and we talked about connection being therapeutic. We talked about information being important and empowering.
Right.
This is a left behind group. So it's important that we just create these safe spaces for honest conversation, and and use those spaces. All of life is preparing us for the right answer. It's not a test, but and it's just important that we are meeting the energy where it needs to be met, and that we're coming in with our authentic selves. Oftentimes we don't even hear the answer. Somebody says,
That's
hi,
right.
how are you? And they're answering, and I'm like, on to the next question. We studied doctors. We studied what we do in the first 18 seconds of a patient visit, and we realized that we weren't even listening to the answer because we walked in the room with an agenda. So don't walk into those spaces with an agenda, and read the room and use your lived experiences to meet them where they are. And sometimes it requires extra work. Do the extra work. And
Wow.
that's what friends and connections and families should be about.
I have
And
to
it pays
say,
off. We have the signs that says that you survive longer with those kinds of connections. So you're actually part of the therapy that we're seeing in the survivorship space.
and that I think people want to just optimize that presence in somebody else's life.
Absolutely.
Of course.
Absolutely.
And I'll tell you what, Donna, and I think who else we just gave us? Cynthia, thank you for your really great comments. Donna's offering books that are helpful in the space. Cynthia is acknowledging that the stigma is real, and that we have to recognize it and then be able to deal with it. We always ask our guests to come up with 3 takeaways in
Mhm.
terms of dealing with the topic, and this is about cancer.
Yeah.
So let's share yours and talk about that a little bit. Lori, thank you for sharing that you are a member of a clinical trial and it's helping you. We appreciate that. All right. So
So
number
I
one, cancer, early detection saves lives. And I think we hear all of that. What does that really mean?
so it seems like intuitive, right?
Yeah.
But early detection saves lives because cancer is a very complex thing. And it's not one disease. It's multiple disease. And the body, as you can see, and from what we hear about immune therapies and all of these advances, the body is kind of equipped to help us to get rid of cells that want to, do their own thing. We don't do it. The body is not smart enough to do it for every cell. So the sooner that we can find that, wayward cell, that wayward thing that's happening in the cancer space, we can do something about it, because it's much easier to fight this fight as a clinician with a little bit of disease than a lot of disease. And this is not one size fit all either. So I apologize for anyone who had a early diagnosis and still did not survive, because I do have those members in my patient population and family. So on balance, early detection, what did it meant for us, and I'm in my almost 6 decades. So it meant for us, doing the mammogram and the colonoscopies and all the things that are recommended in screening for cancer. And that was it, until we unfolded information genetically. And so now we can better understand risk for cancer, who's more likely to get cancer, and who has genetic information that suggests that they should be managed differently. So all of that is early detection, and we call it early detection and early intervention, right? So if we can do more of that and we do it earlier, on balance, we are going to win this war. A cure for cancer. We go to medical school and I want to cure cancer. I think we're close. I really think we're close, but all cancers are not created equal, right?
Yes.
And but we can do things like cervical cancer. Who knew a vaccine, HPV, Gardasil vaccine, would actually prevent cervical cancer? We can get rid of cervical cancer from the virus that actually creates cervical cancer. But that's only one type. What about uterine cancer? What about endometrial cancer, where we're actually seeing a rise? So early detection is one part, but lifestyle, which is the second part, and I don't want to go on without you wanting me to go on. So if we're okay with the early detection, but lifestyle is really where I live. I'm a family doctor. So lifestyle. What do we know about all of our chronic disease? It's about inflammation. Inflammation, inflammation, inflammation. It's also about activity. Inactivity is the new smoking, right? So if we can change our lifestyles to this healthier space, people with certain cancers will survive the cancer, but they'll die of heart disease. You know, we can actually create survivorship, not independent of the diagnosis, with lifestyle changes. So putting a plug in for Dr. Musellem, though, you can go back and look at one of our refreshes that has Dr. Dawn talking about her plant-based diet. Understand the science behind that, understand the consistency of what you can bring to your life. And I'm sure I can't see comments because I'm old and I don't know how to manipulate the screen in that way, but we shared resources, and she has resources in her talk about things that you can do to impact your diet. As parents, because we're talking to women, what can we do to make sure that our children are growing in a space where their habits are better than our habits were, that they're recognizing healthier eating and activity and sleep and conversation, even, to decrease the stress that causes this neuroendocrine, process and contributes to this inflammatory state. It's the environment of micro cancer that actually makes a huge difference. It's why we talk about gut bacteria. It's not the good gut bacteria that we're worried about. It's a little bad bacteria, the little bit. So a little bit can do bad, but a little bit can also, over time, a little bit of change in your diet, a little bit more sleep, a little bit more mindfulness and meditation or prayer, whatever it is that you truly believe in, can bring you to a point of, if not cure, because I'm not in a space that I believe that I'm curing anyone, but how do you experience the disease, whether it's hypertension, diabetes, or cancer? How do you experience that? We heard my takeaway from this last conference was, I'm not, her words were, I'm not a victim. I was victimized. You remember that?
Dr. Edie, for sure,
Yes.
right? Dr. Edie, our
And
pal.
Dr. Edie is always, she's always a gem. But in this
She's always
space,
a
it's how
gem.
it's how you're experiencing the disease. The disease doesn't
Right.
have you, and that's
And
that's
then,
important.
and then moving right along here in terms
Hmm.
of the clinical research, this
Yeah.
is a statement, I guess, of hope. You mentioned several times in this conversation that things are exponentially
Yes.
changing
Yeah.
quickly. You mentioned big data without saying AI, but our data
Hmm.
sets are so big, right?
Yes.
Allowing us
It's
to learn in ways
mhm.
that we never have, right?
Yes, absolutely. And garbage in is garbage out. So it's having all data, but it's trying to figure out what's the good data among them, seeing patterns, understanding. One of my favorite trials that we're about to start here in Florida deals with endometrial cancer that I talked about. So we have made some advances. We know that endometrial cancer is on the rise. We don't know exactly why. We talked about early intervention. So one of the trials that we're currently doing in Rochester is involving AI. And what happens is when you go, if you're postmenopausal and you go to your provider and they say, well, you need to have an ultrasound and an endometrial biopsy, they use the results of that to go, yeah, you're okay, or no, you're okay, you're not okay. What we're doing here at Mayo with one of our trials is we're actually in a clinical trial space using AI to match the tissue at whatever stage it is from the pathologist with the ultrasound report, and we have an algorithm to get some additional cuts to see if we could detect when the change would have been made so that we can intervene not only based on our current standard of if you're 4 millimeters of tissue, then you're more at risk. Because we know that women who don't have the 4 millimeters of tissue on the ultrasound are developing cancer a couple of years later, or they have cancer and we just don't detect it. So
Wow.
having this data, and why is that important here? I'm going to just give my diversity plug, but we have 200 cases that we've done this retroactively. We're now enrolling going forward and hoping that we get the kind of representation. Because what about women of color who may have more uh, GYN masses, fibroids, we call them, or leiomyomas that we call them? Can you really see the cancer with other growth? Is it the same thing as looking at, another person who may not have that predisposition? So we're using AI in that sense. So it's not only data and data crunching, but it's creating algorithms so that we can intervene earlier, so that we can not only use the two-dimensional things that we're using right now to do early intervention. So
Wow.
that's my
I have
ASA.
this question popped up for me. We talked about how more and more people are surviving cancer.
Mhm.
But if you looked at a data set, is the number of people getting cancer lower, the same, or increasing?
So the data set, depending on the cancer. And actually, I'm glad you asked that question because I actually said she's going to ask me this question. So I thought I wrote down which cancers, and we did. So there are certain cancers that we're seeing there's a decrease in the incidence. And incidence is how much cancer do you have? So, and then we're seeing two spaces where we're seeing more cancer. So even though cancer is going down, in the space of pancreatic cancer and endocrine or uterine cancer, endometrial cancer, those are the two spaces across the United States of studies where we're seeing that increased incidence. But we are at the point where we're breaking this down community by community. At Mayo
Right.
and University of Florida and Moffitt, we have what we call catchment area. So we're trying to make sure that we're understanding the area that's around us. For Mayo, it's 9 counties of the patients that are in that geographic area. And what are we seeing? So we might see more pulmonary cancer than another space, than another part of the community. And so there may be incidences where we're seeing more cancer in our local community, but on balance, we are seeing a decrease in the incidence of cancer. Why? Not because cancer is nicer, but because of early detection and early intervention, and because our cures are more effective, right? So it's both. And so that's why we're seeing this incredible improvement in our numbers, but we're not out of the woods. And we're not out of the woods for all groups of people. So that's also, an important takeaway point. I shared the AACR as one of the resources because they have an annual, I'm of the Encyclopedia Britannica stage where you got like the yearbook at the end of the year and
Right.
you got smarter with all. So every year they have a cancer report that's amazing and free. So you can get it on PDF and get it offline, and it's aacr.org. I
Right.
think. And you can have
I
all of
think,
the same,
yeah, I
yeah,
think that Ariel could put that up in the
yeah,
chat.
all,
Yeah.
all of the same things that I know, because the data is just so nicely put together. Other places that you can find out about what's happening in the cancer space, the American Cancer Association, valid, reliable information, both to explain things like some of the new uh, and novel therapies that we're hearing about, where you can get explanation, understanding what CAR T cell, what's immunotherapy, how do you actually take your blood and give it back to you differently so that you can help to fight your cancer. What does that look like?
Right.
So it's really nice to have these spaces now. And I actually really wanted to just say something because I've worn an M on my chest for Mayo Clinic as the opposite W that I'm wearing today. And one of the criticisms that sometimes we hear about any medical system is about access, right? And while we do the best, capacity is going to be capacity, and policies are sometimes not going to be the things that we can do. But this forum the information that's online, these are things that we can do proactively to empower ourselves before we go anywhere. And in this space of decentralized medicine, decentralized clinical trials, we should only be seeing those people who absolutely need to be in a hospital space, if we're doing our job right, because we have so much technology and education
Right.
and ways to communicate with our community, in the telemedicine space and in the education space,
Well,
risk
Dr. Kim,
evaluation space.
I do want to say that I think everybody on this call would want you as their doctor,
Ah,
including me, or in their
bless
life.
you.
And I'm so grateful that you are
And
in our
you'd
life
never
and
be on
Generation
time,
W's
but
life.
thank you.
But it's time. I mean, it's time for us to go. So maybe we'll have to
Uh,
do part two at some point, right? I want
this
to
is what I
thank the
do.
community that, go
I
ahead. I just
appreciate
want
the
to
invitation.
of course, no. I want to thank the community that has shown up, the conversation. The chat has been active and energizing and lively and generous and courageous and all good C words. I love the connection, right? That came together in the community that we have. I just want to remind everyone, put on your calendar, May 15th, we're back to Wednesday, close to Mother's Day. I want to say one thing we all have in common, right? We all have mothers.
Aw.
That's the truth. So we'll be celebrating the joys and challenges of motherhood. We have two fabulous women, and their perspectives are very different. But we have FSU, Florida State University's coach Brooke Wyckoff. She was a player in the WNBA, actually, when I was the commissioner. And since then, she's become a mom to a 10-year-old daughter, Avery. And interesting, she started a blog and podcast for moms in coaching. By the way, we can use more moms in coaching. We encourage one another to win at home and on the court. And then there's Kimberly Paget Morrison, a wonderful woman. I've met Kimberly before. She's an award-winning marketer, fashion stylist. Maybe she'll style all of us for this. Speaker and author. Her first book, Crisp White Shirts, I love this, a coming of middle-aged story, right? That embraces a life lived with style standouts. And I love this. She talked about motherhood occurring in 3 stages. Ready? Morning, noon, and night. So let's celebrate moms. Everybody mark your calendar, May 15th. I know we are so grateful to you, Dr. Kim, for your
You're so
passion,
welcome.
your compassion, your dedication, your smarts, your caring. You make all of us better. And we just want to say thank you to Generation W, our community. I have to just say, I am refreshed. Thank you.
Thank you.